All right, dude, so just to give you a little bit of a breakdown on why you're now hitting blocks when you shallow the club. This is something that I actually come across quite often with players. Obviously, when we first started working together, you had this very steep, very over-the-top pattern of the club, right? The shaft would pitch out in front of the body, and you would be cutting way across the golf ball. Now, naturally, what starts to happen a lot of times with players is that they will adapt to the environment, which basically means your body's going to start making these subconscious little changes through the golf ball in an effort to try to hit your target. Assuming the target is, let's say, the middle of the screen here for me, right? Somewhere right in this area. And so in a case like yours, well, what happens is when you get so steep coming down, this club pitches out in front of the body, you have to swing really left through impact to try to make contact with the ball, because the club head obviously was way out in front of you. What starts to happen is, in an effort to try to make sure that you can still hit your target, the forearms start to travel really slow through the ball. It's not that you wanted to be doing that. This is not something that you necessarily were trying to do on purpose. You weren't manufacturing this. But what happens instinctively is, because you have a target in your mind and you're cutting way across the golf ball, if you have any sort of release of the hands and arms as you're swinging from the outside, you're going to shut the club face too much and you're just going to hit these straight pulls, right? You wouldn't hit the ball anywhere near your target. So what started to happen as you were really steep, is your body says, okay, I need to find a way to not hit these big pulls. How do I get the ball to my target? And that's where we start to see you, as you're coming down, this club starts to work really steep, and then the forearms start to get really slow through the ball. They start to become too passive. And that's not something I necessarily see with good players. I usually see too passive of a forearm movement with golfers who cut across the golf ball too much. And so as you start to swing really outside in, your forearms start to get really slow in an effort to try to keep the face somewhat square so that the ball doesn't just go massively left as a right-handed golfer, just a huge pull, right? And so now that you are starting to shallow the club better, the first thing you're going to do is always hit these big blocks, especially when you have adapted your release pattern to the old club movement, meaning you obviously have these very slow forearms through the golf ball because you would cut across it. Because obviously, if I'm cutting way across this ball and my forearms release over, the face shuts down, I swing very outside in, and I just hit these big pulls. Now, you're starting to see the club movement work into a little bit of a shallower position coming down, right? It's not like your club face is too closed. It's not like your club face is too open. It looks pretty square for the most part. But the problem is, when you start to shallow the club, your forearms aren't going to naturally adapt right away. It takes a little bit of time, right? It's not an organic process that happens overnight. And so as this club starts to work more shallow, well, your forearms are still pretty passive through the ball because of how they used to be forced to release. And so if I'm coming from the inside or somewhat straight into the ball, but my forearms stay really passive, well, I'm not cutting across the ball with passive forearms to keep the face square. Now I'm swinging somewhat neutral or from the inside with passive forearms. And so as I'm coming down into this golf ball, the face angle is always going to stay open, and it's just going to lead to these big blocks. So what you need to understand in this whole process is that your release pattern is still reacting like the older club movement. As soon as you continue to get this club working into a better position, over time, your forearms will start to release a little bit better. And I would encourage you, if you want, you can even manufacture a little bit more of a better release through the arms during this process to speed it up. Meaning, obviously, we don't want you coming into a neutral plane with the club, but you're always hitting blocks way out to the right because your forearms are so slow in how they release. So what do we want to do? Well, we can speed up the forearms. Now, keep in mind, I'm not telling you that you have to achieve a flip through the golf ball. That's not necessarily the case. But every good golfer has some amount of forearm rotation through the golf ball. Every single good golfer has some amount of it. They're not doing this, but every single good golfer does release the hands a little bit. Right now, you don't release your hands at all, or your arms at all, so the face just stays wide open. And again, this is because of your older pattern. So what I would suggest, if you want to try to help you with this process, just feel yourself release the arms a little bit. Feel as though the right arm overtakes the left arm a little bit so that we can start to create a little bit more of a square impact position. That doesn't mean, again, that I want you flipping the hands over super aggressively and stalling the body, but your forearms right now are so passive, they never turn over, and it just leaves the face wide open. So some amount of right arm turning above the left arm as a right-handed golfer here, right? The trail arm is releasing. So think of like my right hand here. A really good drill you can do is you hold the club in your left hand straight up. You take your right hand and you're trying to turn it over the left arm, and you're trying to feel palm a little bit more down to the ground. This is going to teach you how to release the forearms a little bit better. What I used to tell people is it's almost like if I'm trying to shake someone's hand here. Right now, you're doing too much of an underhand movement. Your forearms never turn over, so the face just points way out to the right. Instead, well, let's try to shake someone's hand here. In order to do that, I'm not going to do an underhand toss. I'm going to feel the right arm release a little bit more over the left arm there, right? So you're going to still keep working on the same things you're doing that's helping you shallow the club. We don't want to lose that, but at the same time, you can feel a little bit more releasing of this club. It'll help you square the face. If you do not want to go through that process, the only other way to stop hitting blocks, we would need this club face coming down to be in a much stronger position. There are some golfers who can get away with having a really, really strong club face so that once you have these very passive forearms through the ball, it can still keep the club face somewhat square. I wouldn't suggest it for everybody because a lot of times that creates a very low ball flight. Obviously, if the face is very strong with the passive forearms, it creates a lot of shaft lean. The ball's going to come out really compressed and really low. If you're a high-speed player, that's fine. But if you swing a little slow, the ball might start to come out too low with not enough spin, and it's going to be a nightmare as soon as you get into the longer clubs. So right now, for me, I would suggest if you want to add anything to stop hitting those blocks, add a little bit of some forearm rotation through the golf ball. Like I said, it's not that we want to be flipping, but right now your forearms are so slow that you're taking a club face that's square, and because of your older release pattern, the face stays open through the ball. Whereas if we can start to square this up with a little bit of some forearm rotation through the golf ball, it'll prevent those blocks from happening. And again, all of this was because you used to cut across the ball, so you were forced to have very, very passive forearms coming into it, okay?